Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Leading Change. My name is Emma, and I have the pleasure of having Cayce with me today. And we're going to be talking all about the idea of nuclear verdicts. But before I get to all the questions that I've got for you, can you give everybody an introduction?
Thank you so much for having me, Emma. My name is Cayce Lynch. I'm the administrative partner at Tyson Mendes. We are a nationwide civil defense firm, and we specialize in handling these catastrophic cases, these high value, high dollar cases. We're a trial firm. We take these cases to trial and to verdict across the country, and we specialize in preventing nuclear verdicts, what we're going to be talking about today.
So I think one of the things that I think is probably a collision point between all of the things that I won't stop talking about and the work that you guys are doing is a little bit of the perception of the insurance industry from the outside looking in. And specifically, I think that it's like even more exacerbated with younger consumers. And we're seeing statistics starting to come out that like younger people just really don't feel bad about committing fraud when it comes to insurance. They kind of like look at it as like almost with this entitlement viewpoint as opposed to a financial tool that's used to protect them as something that they are owed, which I think all feeds into this idea of kind of like nuclear verdicts, large payouts. You know, we were even joking when I was in college, like maybe not appropriately, like if I was crossing a road kind of risky, I'd say something along the lines of like, they can pay my tuition. Like those things are very prevalent in society when people are talking about or thinking about the insurance industry. So to get us started, can you talk a little bit about the idea of like, what is a nuclear verdict and maybe why we're seeing so much of it today?
Oh, absolutely. So we define a nuclear verdict as any jury verdict that comes back over $10 million, or if the jury award has this disproportionate component to it. So either, based on the injuries, based on the facts, based on the economic damages, those medical damages in the case, the total award just doesn't seem to make sense, right? Grossly disproportional, outsized award. And you're so right. As I was preparing to come into this conversation to talk to folks about why this is important, I thought of one of my favorite episodes of Parks and Rec. I love Leslie Knope over here. There's a character in it that says, I made my money the old-fashioned way. I got run over by a Lexus. And the other character was like, yeah, I was shocked at how much money you got because you really weren't that hurt at all. That's a nuclear verdict, right? And they're not good, right? These are not good for the economy. These are not good for the insurance industry. These are not good for everyday consumers. So we're gonna talk about why, but these verdicts are increasing in severity and in frequency across the United States. And it's not just these traditional jurisdictions anymore that we have traditionally seen nuclear verdicts. It's every city, every state, every courtroom at this point really is susceptible and vulnerable to it. When you look at the dollar amount of these verdicts increasing across the country between 2010 and 2019, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has tracked that the verdicts have increased 27.5%. So 27.5% more verdicts over 9 years in excess of $10 million. The median of these verdicts is changing. The amount that companies and individuals are insuring, their policy limits are also going down at the same time, which is really interesting because of the cost of insurance. So along the lines of what you've just said about how younger generation, there's also this post-COVID component to it where very anti-corporate sentiments that have kind of always been there are growing and even bigger. And so people really come into jury service wanting to like stick it to a defendant or to a corporation instead of looking at what might be the most fair and reasonable outcome for both sides in the case.
So let's talk a little bit about like kind of the why these are bad, because it's one thing for us, like, again, working in the insurance industry to be like, oh man, like this is rough times for an insurance carrier.
Insurance folks.
Yeah. But there is a side to this that a lot of consumers don't realize is impacting them to the level that it is, and kind of exasperating all of the challenges that they have, or the rightful frustrations that they have with our industry right now. So if a policyholder like walked into the room right now and sat down with us at the table, what is it that you would like them to recognize and understand when it comes to these nuclear verdicts and how they're impacting them as an individual consumer?
Such a great question. Thank you. I want to start with explaining that people who are injured and hurt and suffer a loss need to be compensated. They need to be compensated fully, and they need to be compensated fairly. And that is what our insurance system is set up to protect, right? To appropriately predict risk, and then to appropriately price risk on these insurance policies. And so when a policy is triggered, when a loss happens, like that's the promise. That's the time for the insurance company to fulfill its promise under the policy. So we believe that payments need to happen. We believe they need to be full payments, and they also just need to be fair for both sides, right? It's justice for all. It's not just justice for the plaintiff, it's justice for the defendant as well. So when you look at really who benefits from nuclear verdicts, like when you pull back that curtain, you're going to find one segment of the population that is benefiting from these verdicts. Do you have any guess what it is, Emma?
It's not the policyholder.
It's not the policyholder. It's the plaintiff's bar. It's plaintiff's attorneys. It's these attorneys that you see on TV commercials and on billboards across the country. And let's think about why, right? So why, how do they get paid? Like, just think to yourself for a second, how do these attorneys get paid? You get paid on contingency fees, which means that they only get paid if they win. And the bigger they win, the more they get paid. So they are very, very motivated if they have to if they can't settle the case and if they have to take a case to trial, to get the biggest award they possibly can out of the jury. Yes, because they're representing their client, but there's also like this big personal motivation going on behind the scenes. So the plaintiff's bar has studied human psychology to figure out how they can convince a jury of their peers, 8, 10, 12 people, depending on the courtroom, that a large sum of money, an exorbitant, and I'm talking like tens and hundreds of millions of dollars in an award, is what's just and reasonable and warranted in the case. And so I've got a question for you here, Emma. Okay. So what do you think that jury psychology, those studies are showing? Like, what emotion do these plaintiffs' attorneys need to get jurors to feel to get a big number out of them? You didn't know there was going to be a quiz today.
I didn't. I think, I would imagine that there's probably like empathy is a big part of it, for like the pain and the suffering, which again, you would want that person to be empathetic. Like you were saying, the idea here is justice. But I would also guess that there's a certain amount of like, wouldn't you want this payout if you had been wronged? Is probably, I don't know what that emotion would be other than empathy, but I feel like that's probably part of it.
So you're right on so many different levels. And when it all boils down to it, it's anger. So when
I guess you got to get angry to feel like I got to get the justice. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, to like send a message to this corporation that this is not the type of behavior and conduct we tolerate in this community. Like, very strong language, all focused on getting a jury angry, because angry individual, an angry group of people, like, think about it. When you're angry, you see red, right? And you're not really thinking logically. And if you can tap into that anger over the course of a month or 2 month long trial, like, you've got them set up so nicely at the end to render a big verdict. The second big thing they're doing, in addition to anger, is they've realized that normal human beings like you and me don't show up for jury service just thinking like, oh yeah, I think a $50 million verdict award is where I'm going to end up at the end of the day on this case. Like, we just don't think in terms of those large sums of money. So they've realized what they need to do is prime the jury, right, by talking about very big numbers early and carrying those themes and those asks and those dollar amounts through to by the end of a 4, 6, 8-week trial, a $50 million award sounds totally reasonable because the jury's then been conditioned to get to that big number.
That completely makes sense from like, and this is a different viewpoint, but having been in a sales position, I always talk about one of the biggest things that I needed to overcome was the ability to ask people for money and the ability to see the value in what you were bringing forward. And when you can start to understand the value of what you're bringing forward, bringing large price tags forward as a salesperson is no longer as intimidating, but it comes from like doing it over time and getting comfortable with dealing in those numbers.
Isn't it uncomfortable to talk about money? Isn't it uncomfortable to ask somebody for money?
Yeah. Oh, it 100% is. But so to I guess like the conditioning that needs to happen for it to be like, oh yeah, well, they were asking for 150 and we're only giving them 50. It sounds like, completely reasonable.
Yes.
Duh, this is a no-brainer.
And plaintiffs' attorneys have figured this out, right? So 15 years ago, they completely agreed with you that, we didn't want to offend the jury by asking for a number. Let's let the jury get there on their own. But then they realized when you talk about it early, you prime them, you condition them to get to these big numbers. They're much more successful, meaning their clients win more money and they get more money in their pockets. So that is how it fuels the industry.
So I want to kind of like double tap into this piece of it because this was something we were talking about while we were prepping for this conversation. And you shared something. So it's not like, again, you gave me the quiz. So I had like the first part, I had a little bit of a benefit because we had talked about this. But can you just share with people how much of the award typically goes to the plaintiff's lawyer and how that process works? Because that's the part to me, like, again, from a jury's standpoint, if I were there and I were awarding this $50 or $100 million to an individual who I have become angry and empathetic on behalf of, and I want them to be put into a position where they're better off, I know they're probably not getting the full $50 million, but this shocked me a little bit when we were talking about it.
Yes. So jurors don't hear the whole story, right? There are two things they don't hear when primarily huge things at trial. So one is they don't ever hear that insurance is on the other side. So if you have a small mom and pop shop or you have a trucking company or you even have a large corporation, like there's never a discussion with the jury under the collateral source rule that an insurance company, is involved in the case or may pay any verdict or judgment at the end of the day. The second thing that they don't hear is and they can't consider is how much might actually go to the plaintiff, right? And where the total verdict may go. So there is an entire multi-billion-dollar industry set up to fuel nuclear verdicts and to perpetuate them and grow them in frequency and in size, right? So the plaintiff's attorneys get paid on contingency fees, as I mentioned, and typically by the time you get to trial, it can be a lower percentage if they settle earlier in the case, but typically by the time you get to trial, it can be between 40 and 50%. And that's just off the top, right? Then there are court fees. Then there are litigation funders. That's a whole nother conversation with you, Emma, about this funding, this funding company system economy that's happening behind the scenes to fuel them even more. There are doctors involved in it that get hundreds of thousands of dollars off the top for testifying and being involved and leading treatment and all these things. And again, when somebody is truly hurt or has truly lost a loved one, they need to be compensated absolutely and fully. But a large portion of these verdicts don't go to the hurt person themselves, right? They go to the industry to fuel this perpetual cycle.
Which is a very interesting, thought process to break down when a part of what is fueling these verdicts is the frustration with the corporations and these systems that maybe have wronged somebody. And so to know that they're playing that game in a system and a corporate, like in this like mentality to take advantage of that, but then to fuel a different part of it is a frustrating experience, because at the end of the day, when an insurance company has to pay out these large settlements, that starts to play into the rising costs that we're seeing in our industry. And so it actually perpetuates this story on the insurance being the bad guy side of it, when really it's been a game that's played on the other side that all trickles down to the individual policyholder seeing higher premiums, and or people pulling out of markets where litigation is heavy.
Exactly.
And making it even harder for individuals to get the protection that they need because of this massive game that's going on at this level that people aren't informed about.
Exactly. And I mean, it's not funny money, right? Like, you know, one of the things we talk about with jurors is like, this dollar bill has the exact same value in this courtroom as it does out on the street. Now, I know a dollar can't get you very much anymore, it seems, but this trickle down effect impacts policyholders, the insurance industry, the economy as a whole. So when an insurance company can't appropriately assess a risk, appropriately price a risk, they're vulnerable, right? That impacts the whole insurance industry as a whole. Insurance companies are realizing that the risks are increasing. So as you can imagine, prices are increasing. And it's not just like Fortune 500 companies who have to pay more insurance. I mean, these are mom and pop shops. These are trucking companies that deliver the goods and services that we've so come to appreciate. And we've realized how critical they are post-COVID. And so what do businesses do? Like when their cost of doing business goes up,
it goes up for everybody.
Pass it on to the consumer in the cost of goods and services that we pay for. So in addition to exactly what you just say, some insurers no longer writing certain lines of business or in particular jurisdictions, when they do write, the cost is higher than it's ever been. And that's passed on to you and me.
So I think hopefully everyone that's stuck with us so far recognizes the challenge that is presented by these nuclear verdicts. But what does the path out look like? What options are there for carriers to position themselves differently to be able to not have these nuclear verdicts be paid?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So we have a couple solutions at Tyson and Mendes. Separate from my role with the firm, I serve as an advisory board member for Schaefer City Technologies, and we're an insurtech company that has a pretty innovative product out there called Naval that can identify. It's a software that works within a claims organization to identify a claim's likelihood to go nuclear from the very first day. And it updates automatically behind the scenes as claims professionals are entering information and updating the claim over time. So something that may start out as a low risk may become a higher risk later on due to particular, changes that just happen throughout the course of litigation as more discovery comes out. And so that is really changing the game for carriers to have this additional AI-driven tool working behind the scenes to make sure every single claim that needs a second look gets a second look, so that you have humans have the opportunity, right, to make a strategic decision about how they're going to handle the case. And, if a case can't settle, right, and you go to trial, the defense team just has to do the exact same thing that the plaintiff's bar is doing and evolve, right? Our tactics that we've been using as a defense bar are no longer effective to combat these really innovative, aggressive new tactics that the plaintiff's bar is using across the country to get the big verdicts. And, nuclear verdicts aren't happening to brand new lawyers, right? They're happening to lawyers who are very, very experienced and are resting on their tried and true methods that just no longer deliver in front of a jury. And so at Tyson and Mendes, we have 4 core things that we do in every single case to connect with a jury, to tell the corporate story, to combat that big number, to put a reasonable story behind pain and suffering, and make sure that whatever award's going to come out is that just award that is fully compensating the plaintiff and also fair to both sides. And then I think even policyholders can play a role in this solution as well. If you know what's going on behind the scenes, like show up for jury duty, which is so hard to say because nobody wants to go to jury duty. But the more we talk about this and the more jurors show up and are focused on what's reasonable and what's warranted, what's just, what the just outcome is in this civil litigation system that guides, how we resolve civil disputes in this country, it's going to take more and more people knowing what's going on behind the scenes and actively participating as jurors in this system in order to change the tide.
I mean, I'm with you, but at the same time, I don't know how much we're going to be able to win hearts and minds saying, like, show up for jury duty and do everything.
You can do your civic duty.
But it is important. And I appreciate you kind of like breaking this down. I mean, during our prep call and even this discussion, I've certainly learned something new that's opened up my eyes to the different facets of our industry and how they're impacted by things like nuclear verdicts. So thank you so much for the work that you and your team are doing to help combat this and for joining me for the discussion. And for anybody that's not, make sure you connect with Cayce on LinkedIn and reach out to either one of us if you've got any questions. But thank you again and have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Leading Change. If you like what you saw, be sure to come back on a weekly basis and subscribe for more expert interviews focused on digital transformation, change management, and emerging technologies.